don't think I'm gonna do any kind of introduction this time. We'll just, we got your animation up front, like they can see our names in the corners. So like, I don't think there needs to be really any introduction. So I think we can just start. Get into it.
Mark Maron style. Yeah.
Yeah, standard podcast style. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
All right. Do you wanna start then? You want to talk about maybe the last thing you watched or something interesting?
Oh, let's see. The last thing I watched, I've been just watching things more casually, really. We've been having a lot of snow lately in Portland. I'm sure with a lot of places, really. There's been a lot of places getting hit with really harsh blizzards and
Yeah, we had a whole freeze come through here. It was iced up for a couple days. It's finally starting to thaw.
Same here. And so really the last like 4 or 5 days just kind of hunkered down and watching I guess comfort food kind of movies. And the other night I put on The Matrix. I hadn't seen it in a few years.
Oh, nice. I haven't seen that one in a long time.
It holds up really well. I really, really enjoyed it. I still enjoy it as really just an isolated thing. I like the sequels. I really don't think that I think they're underappreciated actually for what they are. But when you go back and watch the first one, it really is just kind of still so staggering in terms of just the amount of creativity in that movie. Just from the ideas, the execution, the cameras, the whole look of it, the fluidity of it, just how it just feels so energetic and it just flows so seamlessly from one moment to the next. And it's also stylized, but not showy in a way that makes you aware that you're watching a movie. It just involves you so deeply in its story. Every time I go back and rewatch it, I'm just kind of amazed by it. Like, this really is just one of the best action movies ever made. I don't know how you feel about it.
No, yeah, I think it's great. I am also a defender of the sequels. They're much maligned, and yeah, I think all of the sequels are much better than they're given credit for. And I really enjoyed the fourth one too. I think we talked about that once, but yeah, I thought the fourth one had a lot of interesting things to say too. And that can sort of spoil the original for me because I feel like it's one of those ones almost like Lord of the Rings or something like that. It just gets talked up so much, and it's one of the few people that, a certain type of movie guy, it's one of the few movies that type of guy will allow himself to like. So it just gets endlessly talked up. And that kind of, I don't know how it is for you, but that can spoil certain movies for me. It's just like, all right, I get it. I've heard enough. But then when you go back to them, it is a reminder. It's like, no, this is just a really solid film, a really good film that you just enjoy watching. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's kind of what I was so amazed going back to it, is that I guess because of how much a movie like The Matrix has become a part of the culture and has been so endlessly quoted and referenced, and moments in it are kind of what are now considered cliche moments in action movies, to the point they're really, I think, evolved past them. I think it's kind of a cliche notion now to sort of do this rack speed bullet time thing. And I don't see a lot of movies. Certainly there's movies that still owe a lot to The Matrix, but I don't see a lot of direct references in the way that, the 10 years after The Matrix came out, how it was for action movies. But still, when you go back to it, it doesn't feel cliche or derivative. It just feels so original. And that's really what's amazing about it, is that I think it's less so to do with the surface level style and just the whole feeling it embodies. It's just so unique. Do
you remember how old you were when you first saw it?
I don't know that I actually watched it when it was brand new. I think I probably watched it maybe a year or two after it came out. I know before the second one came out, because I remember going to the theater to see the second one, but it probably was about 10 years old when maybe like 9. So I think the second one came out in 2003, so I probably saw it either around 9 or maybe just as I was turning 10. And that definitely is an impressionable age to see a movie like that. And I know
Yeah,
you saw it in the theater, so that probably even left an
yeah.
even bigger impression.
When it was brand new, yeah. So 1999, I would have been about 8 years old, and yeah, saw it in the theater with our mom, and yeah, I think I don't think I followed the story at all. I certainly didn't understand any of the philosophical ideas or anything like that. But I think just as a propulsive narrative and as a visual spectacle, I was really blown away by it. Because it is, when you were saying it was such a cliche thing once bullet time happened and how many movies copied that, it's such a corny thing, anytime a movie did that, even as a parody, you just kind of roll your eyes and go, oh, here we go. But I don't know. I don't know what else to compare it to. Like the first time you actually saw that, there had never been anything like it before. Even use of slow motion in movies, there just had never been an effect like that before, and it was such a feeling of excitement, getting to see that and experience that for the first time. And this is one of those ones, sort of like The Sixth Sense, like more than the movie itself. I think what really left an impression on me was seeing it with our mom and coming out of it like how impressed she was, like just getting that feeling like when you're with an adult, it's like, oh, adults really think this is amazing. So like, you get that feeling like this is a big deal. And so I think that left just as much an impression on me as the movie itself. And then it was one that like I don't think I even began to really understand it until much later, which I'm sure is the case for a lot of people.
I think so, yeah, and I think that's probably what is principally appealing about it is the style of it. But I think it's rewarding to go back to because you could see that it's not just a, a surface level movie. They've really put so much into it in terms of just like cramming every possible idea about identity and consciousness for a major Hollywood movie like that, which I guess it's sort of maybe more of an independent spirit, but it's amazing just to see that, like, man, they really did just try to put everything in here. It does kind of feel like the sequel, even though I like the sequels, it feels a little superfluous because it's like everything is in that first movie. And it kind of feels like a Hail Mary situation where it's like, we may not get to make another movie like this, so let's just make it our ultimate statement on, like everything we love about action films, philosophy, science fiction, Hong Kong action. It's staggering still for me to go back to it.
Do you have a favorite aspect of it? Because I don't want to be presumptuous, but I don't think you're. I don't mean this as an insult, but I don't think like you're really an intellectual kind of viewer. You don't really watch movies, I don't get the sense you don't really watch movies to like really think about ideas in kind of an abstract way. You seem more of like a kind of viewer. You watch it for the emotional experience or the visual experience. So, is there an aspect of The Matrix that like especially speaks to you, or is it just the level of the craft and the visual? The visual design of it? Like, what's your favorite thing about it?
Well, it's hard to pick a favorite thing because I think all of it works so harmoniously. I think that's one of the reasons why it is so much fun to go back to, because you're just constantly rediscovering so many things that work about it. But I think just going off what you said, I agree. Like, I do watch things more with an emotional bent, and I was actually really appreciating Keanu Reeves' performance a lot going back to it, because I think he always felt like the right part, like the right guy for it, but I never really like appreciated his performance so much. And this time I really was just kind of watching the subtlety of what he was doing. Just like that really is a factor that makes kind of all of this work, of this sort of muted reaction to things. I love the interrogation scene, the first one he has with Mr. or Agent Smith. Agent Smith is kind of laying out a plan, a negotiation essentially of like, okay, if you give up Morpheus, we'll wipe your slate clean. You have a fresh start. You can basically go back to a life of normalcy. And how did that sound? And Keanu Reeves, the whole way Keanu Reeves plays that scene of not really expressing anything, just wow, that sounds like a really good deal. Like, how about I just give you? I got an even better deal. Like, how about I give you the finger and you give me my phone call? And he could have been really cocky and really like a character there. I think about how that would have been done now with more of like the action personality of that being like that would really be played up as a comedic moment. But I was so much more endeared to it and so much more receptive of that humor because of that extremely understated way he plays that and doesn't really signal that he's going to turn in that way.
Yeah, the downplay and the subtlety. Yeah, I see what you mean.
I just love, and it's through that the whole time, the whole movie of even the more spectacular moments of how he's just kind of quietly taking things in, and you could see that change happening in him, see his reality changing and his perception of the world expanding, but it's not overplayed. It's just very internal and believable.
Yeah, I've heard some people say that like he's kind of a stand-in for the audience, and I think that's really true. And yeah, that's a smart choice to make him a receptive viewer. Because yeah, I think you're totally onto something there. It would have kind of ruined that experience if he had been commenting on things, if he had been reacting. Like, yeah, that what really makes that work is the fact that he is a receptive viewer, and we're kind of being we're sort of vicariously sharing in that. We're the receptive viewer sharing that experience with him. That is key.
How about I turn it over to you? I know. So you said you've also been having really really extreme weather in Texas. What have you been watching? I imagine you've been staying inside. What have you been watching while you've been kind of locked down?
I've been kind of jumping back and forth between a lot of things. Let me think. Criterion Channel has some new collections that they've been featuring, and I've been spending a lot of time on the Criterion Channel. One that has been drawing my attention is the Handmade Films collection. You've been checking that one out?
I have seen that they added that collection, but I haven't gone and dived into it yet. You've seen most of those, right? You were a Handmade Films connoisseur for a little bit.
I read this book a few years ago. It was called Very Naughty Boys. It's like the amazing true story of Handmade Films. I think it's by Robert Sellers, I think is the author's name. It's a really good book. I recommend checking it out if you haven't read it. But that kind of takes you through the whole history of the studio, and how George Harrison formed it, and sort of like the decision-making process behind the films they would do, and just how it really wasn't like any other British studio that ever existed. And it's just an amazing story. Like, like the Life of Brian story and everything like that. But yeah, there was really nothing else like it in the history of British film. And the films they made, I mean, there are the famous ones, obviously, like we all know those, and there are plenty that are appreciated. But there's so many interesting, like more obscure, like forgotten ones that I've been kind of discovering too. I read that book, and I tried to go through all of their productions. I was only able to see like just a handful that I hadn't seen. And there are still ones that are missing from the Criterion Channel collection, but most of them are up there. And I've been trying to get through the ones that I wasn't able to see way back when. And there have been some interesting discoveries. Some of those movies, I gotta admit, some of the movies they made are pretty damn bad. I can see why they're forgotten, but I've also been discovering some gems too.
The one that was coming to mind when you said bad was I can't remember the name. I'm sure you'll remember. It's the one with Randy Quaid.
Oh God, you nailed it. Yeah, Cold Dog Soup.
Yeah, I knew that was going to be the one that you were. I've heard pretty, not great things about that one, but it's cool that it's available to stream now. But it doesn't sound like you were. It wasn't ripe for reevaluation or rediscovery.
No, bizarrely, like it does have a cult following. I was really surprised but it does seem to have like sort of a cult of people that really do love it. I guess it was one that played on IFC a lot, really late at night, and so people just kind of caught it on IFC and grew to be fans of it. But yeah, I'd heard that was one of their worst productions, and yeah, it lives up to the reputation. It's pretty awful. I was kind of. It's one of those ones because there's talented people involved. You know, like Randy Quaid is a good actor. He's really funny in the Vacation movies. I also just recently rewatched The Last Detail, and I don't know if you've seen that one. Have you seen Last
I've
Detail?
never seen Last Detail. No.
That is really one worth watching. That's a very underrated character piece from the 70s. And Randy Quaid's brilliant in that movie. It's a great performance he gives. So I mean, he's funny, he can act, but he is, I mean, so off mark in this movie. And Frank Whaley is the star, and I mean, he doesn't seem to really have any idea, honestly, what he's doing throughout the entire thing. It's one that tries so hard to be weird and quirky, and just nothing lands. Like the scenes just go on and nothing is funny. Every quirky idea is just like, it makes no sense, you know, and it's not inspired, and it doesn't seem to arise out of the situation or the setting or anything. It's just kind of like a collection of ideas. Like, say, it'd be weird if this happened next. Do you even know what it's about? Like, I don't want to be too vague here.
It's something about a guy and a dog. That's all I've really gathered from it. Maybe
yeah, I mean,
soup.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, basically there's a simple concept. It's like Frank Whaley plays like a yuppie kid. He meets like this sexy girl in a gym. He's invited to her apartment. He goes there. While he's there, like trying to score, basically, it's like sort of an after hours setup. Her dog dies, and she's like, "Oh, I can't do anything else until we give the dog a burial." So he's like, "Okay, I'll take the dog out to Central Park. I'll bury it for you, and then I'll come back." And then, very much like in Martin Scorsese's After Hours, he ends up he gets picked up by this cab driver played by Randy Quaid, and they go on this bizarre odyssey. And it's like, I think it's trying to be like insightful, like he's supposed to kind of grow and learn along the journey. But if that's the point, like it's buried under everything else, because it's like he gets like chased by some sort of, they're almost like a post-apocalyptic Mad Max gang and like motorcycles and ATVs. And there's just a bizarre scene where he's negotiating with them, and they end up like buying the dog's blanket. There is stuff like there's a whole voodoo ceremony where they talk to the spirit of the dead dog. Like, it's just one thing after another, and you're just like, what is the point? You know, where is this coming from? It's just trying to be odd, and not unlike a movie like After Hours, which is a great comparison. Like, all of that feels like it really comes out of New York, you know, and that sort of headspace. It feels very grounded in a time and place and in a certain kind of people and mindset. And a movie like Cold Dog Soup is like, they're just grabbing shit out of nowhere, you know. It really doesn't lead to anything.
Now, at that stage, was George Harrison involved in any of these projects being greenlit? Because that's kind of the genesis of how that company started, was George Harrison essentially being pitched Life of Brian and saying like, yeah, I want to see that movie. I'll pay for it. And it's forming a production company around that simple want of just wanting to see the movie. I imagine at that stage, the studio is probably operating on its own independence away from George Harrison. But do you happen to know if he like was pitched that idea and was like, oh, that sounds pretty funny, yeah, let's make that, or if he had any involvement in any of the movies at that stage, because it's later in its life, right?
Yeah, I think if it wasn't their last production, it was one of their last productions. And like Ferns was actually looking it up. We discovered like it made like a whopping 600 pounds at the British box office. Like, it tanked hard. Like, if it wasn't such a cheap movie, I mean, I would imagine that's got to be one of the biggest flops ever produced.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but I think by that point, the details are kind of foggy now because it's been so long since I've read the book. I did actually watch the documentary in the collection on the Criterion Channel, which is also good, called An Accidental Studio, which kind of is like it sort of goes into all the Handmade films lore and gives you like an overview of the studio's lifespan. And the sense I got from the documentary is like there was a definite point when George Harrison kind of checked out, because there were different forces in the company. Like there was his business manager, Dennis O'Brien, who very much wanted them to be like a major studio in competition with the other major studios. And for Harrison, it was really just, he wanted to have fun and get his friends' movies made. So there was a definite point when like he just kind of stepped back and was no longer involved. I think there were a couple of movies that he did step in and approve, like Withnail and I think was one of their later productions. And that got made directly because of him, because he liked the script and wanted to see it. But after that, I don't think he was directly involved in anything else. So I think Cold Dog Soup would have very likely been one. Like I don't even know if he knew they were even making it.
Maybe didn't see it either. Well, in the either and the other end of the spectrum, what's one that you've been able to revisit in the collection or see for the first time that you really liked?
I actually saw this one called Five Corners, which I had heard about. I remember reading about it in the book, and I wasn't able to see it at the time, and I finally did. I actually really liked that one, and I'm surprised. Like I was able to discover a definite cult for Cold Dog Soup. There wasn't one that I could discover for Five Corners, and that kind of baffled me because I thought Five Corners was really, really good. Have you ever heard of that one?
I don't think I have.
Yeah, it's there's not really so much of a plot to it, but it's written by, I hope I'm getting the guy's name right. John Patrick Shanley. He's the guy that wrote
Doubt and Moon. Did he write Moonstruck?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Great
this
writer.
Yeah, this was another one of his early screenplays. I think it was after Moonstruck. I'm guessing. I don't know for certain, but it's actually really good. It's very original. It's just it takes place at the Five Corners in New York, and it's just sort of like a day and a night in the lives of this very kind of odd, offbeat collection of characters. And like, again, very much in contrast to Cold Dog Soup, which doesn't seem based in anything in particular. Like this is a movie that feels very grounded in time and place. It's set in either the late 50s or early 60s, kind of as the civil rights movement is really starting to gain momentum. So like you've just got a few characters, like Tim Robbins plays a guy who's wanting to get involved in the civil rights movement. John Turturro plays a guy who is just been released from prison and is clearly unstable and is trying to find this woman that he assaulted, and that was the reason he got put in jail. He's tried to assault this woman played by Jodie Foster, and now he's just kind of out and is like basically looking to finish what he started. So there's kind of like this sinister sort of suspenseful drive that I guess you could say is like the main storyline. But then just sort of around it are all these odd, interesting characters just kind of going about their business. And there are just so many scenes that I thought were so original and so well observed and so interesting. There's like a whole subplot with these two girls that kind of meet these two guys on the street basically and go home with them. And then the next morning they just sort of spend the day together and get to know one another. And there's this great sequence where like, they can't really afford to do anything. So the guys are like, oh, we know something fun we can do. So they jimmy open like an elevator shaft and get them on top of the elevators. And they just sort of ride the elevators up and down the elevator shafts. And it kind of develops into a suspense sequence. But I was just watching that thinking like, I've never really seen a scene like that in a movie, like where this is the setting for a romantic date. And it's actually really well done. The actors play it really well, and just the tone of the writing is so spot on, of getting that balance of weirdness, but of grounding it enough and making it human enough and of communicating the emotions very clearly every step of the way, so that it doesn't just feel like it's, off in the ether being weird, but it's actually grounded, in the actual emotional experience of the characters, and you're really interested by what's happening. But I just thought it was a fantastic movie, and I couldn't believe I hadn't heard more about it.
No, it's completely new to me. And was that one? Obviously, it probably didn't do incredibly well at the time if it has been largely unavailable. But is it one that you, I guess, like uh, can envision getting like a cult following, like with more attention on it, or is it just kind of? Do you think it'll just sort of be a hidden gem in their body of work for however long it is in there?
I don't know. That's a good question. Like, if there isn't a cult, I'll definitely be the first member because I really enjoyed it. But it's one of those ones, I guess, kind of like With Nail and I, which I'm amazed With Nail and I has the cult that it does, because it's one of those ones that, like, I feel like most people would watch it and at the end of it go, well, what was the point of that? It doesn't really arrive at like a solid conclusion where, like, everything is tied up and you're just kind of like, oh, okay, I understand what that was about. It's a little more enigmatic than that, which I really like. I think it gives it kind of a haunting quality. But I feel like it would still be one that most people who come to it would just kind of be maybe confused and frustrated by it. So I think it's for a very specific kind of viewer, I guess, that is just like interested in finding something very much off the beaten path. But I would still, I would encourage you to check it out, see what you think. But yeah, it would definitely be one that, like, if people like that kind of cult movie, I would definitely give that to them as a recommendation just to see what they think.
Are there other because I'd say like the most famous ones, probably like Time Bandits, With Nail and I, Life of Brian. It seems like those probably are the ones that most people are familiar with, but is there one out of that batch that you think more people should see, or that you think is underrated, or is kind of due for another look?
Well, aside from Five Corners, definitely the one that I have been, like, pretty much a lifelong fan of, and that I think is like the most underrated movie in the entire Handmade Films canon, is How to Get Ahead in Advertising. I love that movie. Have you seen that one?
Really long time ago. I think I was too young to really understand it. It kind of went over my head, I think. But I remember the strangeness of it. But that's really about it. What is it that you love about it?
I just love what an original idea it is. I love the dialogue of it. It's a really verbal, like, dialogue-driven movie, and so you've got this amazing comic performance by Richard E. Grant in the central role, and the way he's just kind of like chewing through all of this dialogue, a mile a minute, and giving this incredibly manic performance and sustaining this energy level, for the whole thing. It's pretty amazing, and it's one of those concepts, of like an advertising executive growing another head out of his shoulder. Like, you just think there's no way anybody could make that work, and he totally makes it work. And so I just think it's brilliant for how well it executes a bizarre idea, and just the satirical edge of it, I think, is amazing. It was a movie that I really believe was so far ahead of its time and what it was pinpointing about media and about greed and about advertising and marketing and just everything about where the culture was going at that time. I think you could double feature that movie with Oliver Stone's Wall Street and get kind of an encapsulation of the 80s, and kind of see how that led directly to where we are right now. But I think it's a great film, a brilliant film, and I just think it's so criminally underseen and underappreciated.
Yeah, I know there was a disc of it for a while that's been out of print in North America. And that's how I even became aware of it, was because I think they released a few Bruce Robinson movies. Criterion did, kind of close together, and so I saw that. Probably when I saw it was I saw With Nail and Die and really liked it, and then I remember going from that to How to Get Ahead in Advertising and not really knowing what to make of it so much.
It
But
is a little
again,
bit like that.
yeah, but I mean, it was like I probably was still in high school, so I think probably with a little bit more understanding of probably uh, the I guess the way that adults develop with the kind of corporacy adjacency there. I could probably find more humor in it, I imagine, because I'm sure there's probably more of an inside that you're kind of watching it kind of with, uh, I guess, a better understanding of the kind of, would you say yuppie, like 80s kind of?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, in a way. Not like the stereotypical yuppie, but definitely the Grant character in that one is like somebody who aspires to be a yuppie, certainly.
yeah. Is it one that you find, because I'm really not like remembering a lot of specific moments, but is it one that you really appreciate specifically for the writing, or are there like visual things that really resonate with you? Because I think Bruce Robinson does have uh, a good, I guess, a good visual sense. Like there's shots in With Nail and Die that really stick with me. But is there things in it and with How to Get Ahead in Advertising that resonate with you?
It's the writing, it's the sharpness and like just the savage wit of it and the satirical edge of it. And I think especially it's Richard E. Grant, like the energy he gives all of it, and the fact that he's all in that character and that performance, and just how broad some of the ideas are, and how he really makes it work. Like the fact that his evil second head that he grows has a mustache, and that's how you can tell them apart. It's like it's such a cliche thing, but like it's so perfect for the metaphor of the idea to give the evil one the mustache. And yeah, the way he kind of banters back and forth with himself, and how he's able to give such a clear distinction between the personalities of the two sides of himself. And yeah, again, it comes down to the writing, how clever it is, and how pointed it is, and how he's able to just tap into exactly the energy that is needed to bring that to life. And I think it's an amazing just like physical performance too, because of how much he has to do, how much he has to move, and how much he has to be, in like this contorted sort of extreme state, and how he's doing that almost every scene, but it never becomes repetitive. It never becomes like exhausting. It's like you can't stop watching the guy because he's so fascinating and so charged, and doing so much. And I love the sequence where he kind of like has a breakdown, and it's like just sort of destroying his home and all of his like appliances and all of his like little status objects, in kind of this really bizarre sort of like what in his head seems perfectly logical. And I love that too, how he's explaining it to his wife, of what he's doing makes perfect sense, but it's like it's completely nutty, and everybody sees that he's lost it. But to him, it's like no, I'm perfectly sane right now. And he's like naked in an apron, like. So yeah, it's the comic invention of it, and it's the energy of it. That's what I really, really love about that movie.
I love
but
that he's.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, going off of Richard E. Grant, I think he's always been just very dependable in bringing that energy in practically everything he's in. I not saying that the movie's bad, but I'm saying like even if it's not something that you can really identify with or really get invested in, you can probably at least come away like really appreciating his performance, and that's true of like everything he's in practically. I've heard he's in that movie, the new one, Saltburn, which I've not seen yet.
Yeah, which I've heard very divided opinions on.
Exactly, but consistently I've heard that Richard E. Grant is good in it. So
okay,
like it seems like both parties can agree on that. But I've also heard very widely divided opinions on that one. I probably will. I'll see it eventually. I don't know if I'll go out to the theater to see that one, but the trailer looked interesting.
It does look interesting. Yeah. Have you got another one that you've seen recently?
Well, actually, adjacent to Handmade films, I just rewatched the George Harrison documentary that Martin Scorsese made of like 2017 or something like that.
Oh, nice.
I think it's Living in the Material World, I believe.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. The big 4-hour one.
Yeah. Yeah. I put that on because it was snowing. I couldn't go anywhere that day. I was like, I think I'll just put on a long movie, clean the kitchen, just kind of like just be in this room and sort of be sort of productive, but watching something. And I had seen that documentary when it came out, and I actually bought it when it came out. So I've had that disc on my shelf for many years since watching it. It was a great opportunity to just be like, I've had this for a few years, and if it's on your shelf, you should give it life and put it into your player every once in a while. Like, this seems like the right opportunity, and it really was. Like, I forgot just how much I love his music. I love I guess any time that you're going back into that window of the Beatles and the 60s and that period of change, and just what an exciting time it was. It's from that aspect, I think it's always just going to be one of the most exciting and joyful periods ever. So, I mean, that's why I loved Get Back so much. I'm so thankful that we have something that just lets us sit in this place and time for 8 hours or whatever, and tries to keep it as authentic and preserved as possible, because it is such a special time. And
do you have a favorite Beatle?
Well, it's kind of always been George.
Okay.
I think, just because the movie really gets at why he really was such a I suppose I wouldn't say enigmatic, but why he was such an interesting one out of the other three, because I think he was a little bit harder to pin down, because he was deeply spiritual, but he also wasn't really above being angry and bitter about things. How, really the end of the Beatles was kind of signaled by him mostly, of being really creatively stifled and frustrated by the presence of another creative person, by someone like Paul McCartney, who had strong opinions about how the music should sound, and essentially just kind of shutting down with that and feeling like, you know what, I don't want to be around that. I want to make my own music. And that's really interesting. It's, even though he is a person who lives so harmoniously with the world and others, and has so many friends in so many different places, and is so by the moment, he also has these really kind of almost contradictory behaviors and with some aspects of his life. And I just find that really interesting. I think his music was really interesting for that reason. I think there was always something beautiful, but with a slight edge to it, that was just really appealing, that I've always really loved about his music. I think.
Do you have like a favorite period, like a favorite solo album, or do you like Traveling Wilburys? Like, is there a favorite era or single album that really stands out to you?
Well, I it's not a surprising answer, but I think All Things Must Pass, the album that he did just after the Beatles breakup, really is just one of the best albums ever recorded, and I mean, for good reason, because it's all the songs that the Beatles passed on, and so they were just building up for years, like all of these great songs that either Paul or John would go, yeah, it's good, but not really right for this band, and then finally he has an opportunity to assemble those and realize them, and every single song on there is just incredible. And so that album is an explosion of creativity that is just, it's hard to beat that. He has a lot of great albums since then, a lot of great songs since then. I love Traveling Wilburys, and that's a fun section of the documentary too, is reliving that and seeing just kind of what I was talking about it with my roommate, with Brett, of just saying, like, that really, it's one of those things where you hear about the Traveling Wilburys and you don't believe that actually happened. Like, George Harrison wasn't in a band with Bob Dylan and Tom Petty and Roy Orbison. Like, no way, that did not happen. And then you actually see the music videos and you like listen to the music and like, oh my god, like that's incredible. It is. It's. I love reliving that, and I love sort of seeing the genesis of that period in the documentary. And I love that he gives attention to that. I love that Scorsese gives attention to just the fun projects that made him who he was. Just the kind of like lackadaisical, like, oh, that would be a great laugh to do an album with all my friends, and and they go into handmade films for that reason too.
Do you have for the documentary itself, do you have a favorite section of the documentary, or is there a piece or a moment that like really sticks out to you as like as a particular favorite in that movie?
Well, not to be downbeat, but I think the thing that I was completely unaware of, surprisingly, was the home invasion attack that happened to him in the late 90s.
Oh yeah, I remember that part of the movie. That's a really powerful sequence.
I remember first seeing the movie and just being completely blindsided by that, of like, how did I not hear about this? That's like so devastating to happen to somebody, and especially if someone like that famous, to like I was just very surprised I hadn't heard that story. Maybe because it happened so close to his death. I think maybe perhaps if he was still around, it'd be more well known. But maybe since he's passed, it's just not as remembered specifically, or just not as talked about.
Got sort of lost in the fray.
Yeah. But I remember seeing that in first section, or the first when I first watched it, and just being so horrified by the description of the events, because George Harrison's wife is interviewed, and it's still, you could tell, something that plays in her head because of how visually she describes things and how like meticulously and her thought process of like how she was perceiving things versus how they were actually occurring, and her description of that, of just the clarity of how she's describing things, is so chilling.
Yeah, you can feel it's something still that was still even then like really emotionally present for her. It hadn't faded.
And then like the effect that had on George Harrison after that, of just being like, man, how could somebody do that? How could there be that much? Maybe evil's not the right word, but like, how could something be so unharmonious? And I guess
that sort of nonsense.
Yeah, exactly. How could there be just that lack of reason? How can we reckon with that? And empathy. It is still something that's troubling. I mean, it's because it's not isolated. That stuff happens all the time. And I think reflecting on that at the end of that documentary, of just seeing this glorious life being lived, and then just to have something so ugly happen towards the end of it, and then obviously uglier, that getting cancer and passing away, and like all of that is just so devastating and such a somber note to end on. But I mean, also just I think informs you about the nature of life, that it doesn't really matter who you are, that there's this kind of lack of reason for why things happen, and who they happen to, and now you can even attribute that to their fame, like why it's there. I don't really believe there was like a destiny so much as that for some reason the universe just settled on these four people being together, and for some reason
you wake up every morning and then stuff happens to you.
Yeah, and he seemed to have that attitude. Like, he seemed to not have delusions of grandeur about why he was the chosen one, to be this famous person, and to be such a cultural icon. He seemed to have a very grounded dealing with that, which I think is also very compelling to watch and to see at the height of his fame, navigating that, and still being so young, and trying to keep a clear head about it all. They include letters to his mother of him writing and just kind of like processing things and talking about like just how surreal everything is. But even, in any younger voice, there's the kind of like soberness about it all, just being like, well, I know it's not going to last forever, and I know this is crazy, and I know that this is just a freak occurrence that's occurring, but like while it's happening, I'm going to try to do the best I can and try to make good and try to be the best I can be. And like, so I guess it's all very inspiring for that reason. It's a wife that warrants a documentary from Martin Scorsese. That's like the highest compliment I can pay, because there's so much embodied in it. And on one hand, you can watch it and just enjoy the beautiful music, but on the other, I feel like you could just learn so much about about the journey that we all are on through this life, through this incredible life, all the highs and lows. It's a pretty stunning documentary. I think actually within Scorsese's films, it's fairly overlooked. I don't really hear it come up very often. I think it's just an outstanding movie.
Fade out.